Hello, everyone. It's your girl Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. If you are new to the show, let me tell you what the show is about. And if you are returning to the show, let me just remind you what the show is about. So, this is the show where we like to have real talk about real things. So, things that we tend to focus on are things in education, employment, mental health, empowerment. We've done episodes about homeschooling, living with disabilities. We've done plenty of episodes about ADHD, anxiety disorder. What else have we done? Robots taking our jobs. We've done plenty of episodes about the tutoring industry. So there's a lot of ground that we cover. And as we are part of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services, so of course we have to take an educational angle in all that we talk about. So today's topic, I'm looking forward to this topic because I have a returning guest. So I love it when the guests come back to the show. It's a brand new topic, but it's a returning guest. She is returning to the hot seat, and I'm having all these episodes about mental illness. So I'm continuing that conversation, and I'm using my platform to address that. So let me tell you the name of the episode first and then the returning guest. So, the topic, not the name, but the topic of today's episode is what is bipolar disorder? We are going to dive into that. And like I said on my previous episode about schizophrenia, with my background in mental health counseling, whenever I get to talk about mental health, mental illness, I get to geek out, right? I get to put on my mental health counseling hat and go all in, right? So any opportunity I have to put on my mental health counseling hat, I'm definitely taking advantage of that. So we're going to dive into it. What is bipolar disorder? So, Sarah Gallup is a licensed psychologist at a forensic state hospital, and she's the host of the new podcast, Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospital. So, we are going to reference her podcast later on in the show. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Sarah to the stage. Hi, Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Gabrielle?
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you for coming back to Hot Topics for the third time.
Woohoo!
Right?
Lucky
Yeah.
number three.
Yeah. Thank you for coming back. We're going to dive right into it. So let's jump right into it. Just before, I just want to shout out that we were just talking about the new DSM
Mm-hmm.
5. Is it 5?
The
I have the
DSM
what's the
DSM
purple
five
one?
PR.
Okay, PR. So I'm like, wait, the
PR,
purple one is 5. Yeah. TR.
which text revision?
Ah. All right. So, we're the in the counseling health field. So we're talking DSM.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, what in the world is a DSM? It's what does it stand for again? Diagnostic.
Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right. It's a whole book
It's a whole
that
thing.
outlines all the disorders and it actually breaks it down what it is, the symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
and all that good stuff. So it's pretty much like the counselor's Bible or the
It is. Yeah.
psychiatrist's Bible. It's like the Bible to
There's
people in
also
the
like
mental health world.
research
Yeah.
that's kind of scattered in too, which is really cool about the prevalence in certain groups, and I think that's really interesting.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get right into it. All right, so that is the question. What is bipolar disorder? What is it? Take it away.
All right. Well, Usually bipolar disorder, there are actually 3 different types of bipolar disorder. And so unlike schizophrenia, which is sort of a spectrum disorder, you can have really mild symptoms, you can have really severe symptoms. Bipolar by definition has the 2 poles. And but they vary in intensity. And so the folks that I'm most likely to come across have bipolar 1 disorder. And bipolar 1 disorder is made up of a number of symptoms like elevated mood, expansive mood, which kind of means that they're, um, for lack of a better term, they're really full of themselves, and or irritable mood, and that lasts at least a week. So that's one of the primary symptoms that we notice with bipolar 1 disorder. These are really intense. They interfere with somebody's functioning, their ability to hold a job, their relationships with other people, their ability to follow the law. It can really get people into a lot of trouble. It can take a toll on their physical health functioning as well. So there are a number of different symptoms that somebody with bipolar 1 disorder might have. And that's, like I mentioned, inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. Sometimes during these periods of these manic episodes, people can believe that they are the Queen of England. They can believe that they are the richest person in Malibu. They can, all sorts of things. They can believe that they are a songwriter for Selena Gomez, or, who knows what. So there are all these sorts of things where they believe that they are somebody of a higher status than they actually are. A really key feature of bipolar disorder, especially during a manic episode, is decreased sleep. And this one really fascinates me as somebody who requires a lot of sleep. But folks with bipolar disorder can sometimes get away with an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of sleep a night, and they feel rested. Often they'll stay up essentially for days on end because there's too much to do. They have things to do. They've got to get going, and there's just no time for sleep. So that's always an interesting symptom that is really telling when somebody's struggling with a manic episode. They can also, in the course of their mania, have this like racing thoughts or flight of ideas where it really feels like they can't slow their brain down. And this can be really frustrating. Their brain can feel like a jumble of ideas. And often they'll come up with what they believe are some of their best ideas they've ever had during this time. And they'll think, oh my gosh, I have all these brilliant ideas for songs. I'm going to start writing songs. And I was trying to remember this the other day. There is a famous songwriter who struggled with bipolar disorder and said that during his manic episodes, he would just write music the whole time. Like he's having this epiphany of the world's best music. And then after the manic episode passed, he'd review the work and be like, that is really, really bad. And so I always thought that was really interesting that in that moment, they can think that they're having these brilliant ideas of genius, and then they can really not be very great, but it produces a lot of work. Probably one of the most problematic aspects of bipolar disorder for the folks that I work with is the increase in impulsivity or risk-taking behavior. So this can look different ways for different people. I knew somebody once who, when they were in manic phase, they would buy shoes, just a lot of shoes. And I mean, except for that person's bank account, it's relatively harmless. But other times people will go out and they'll just have sex with anybody they can find. They won't use protection. It can be really, they can make poor choices. They can not be checking for consent, those sorts of things. So that can be super problematic in many ways, including in legal ways. They can also engage in like theft. And so that's a really common way that people get themselves in trouble with bipolar disorder. And so what's interesting, I think, about this is that the actual episodes that we're talking about, the manic episodes and then the depressive episodes that sometimes occur, um, they're a week, 2 weeks long, and then the person can go months and months and months without having another cycle. And so it's really fascinating at the hospital where I work. Our folks with bipolar disorder are generally what we call the higher functioning patients. So they can go for months seeming like anybody from the community. And then once they start cycling, then it's like, oh, there are these other symptoms that are coming out. So we may only see problematic behaviors or problematic symptoms once every like 6 months or so. And so that can be really interesting. I noticed a trend a while back. We have a unit council. Every unit at the hospital has about 10 guys who serve in sort of leadership positions, and there's the president or the chairman of the unit council, and they're sort of the leader of the entire unit. Almost exclusively, those folks have bipolar disorder because they tend to be higher functioning for most of the time. And I noticed that, several months ago, and I thought it was really interesting that off the top of my head, most of the guys I knew in that position were doing ostensibly pretty well most of the time, except for those moments when they cycled. Bipolar disorder also has, in addition to the highs, it can have the low lows. Bipolar 1 disorder, folks don't always have depressive symptoms, but they can. The only requirement is that they have the manic episode in order to have a diagnosis of bipolar 1. So the depressive episodes are really similar to the basic criteria for major depressive disorder. So increased sleeping, increased or decreased eating, increased or decreased weight gain, thoughts of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, thoughts of suicide, those sorts of things. And so it looks very similar to a normal depressive episode. So bipolar 1, like I mentioned, is the one where people generally get themselves in trouble. One of the differentiating features between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is that bipolar 1 disorder, the symptoms are going to be severe enough that they're going to interfere with daily activity. So I already mentioned the fact that it can interfere with somebody's job, their relationships with other people, with their ability to follow the law. Folks who have bipolar 2 disorder are not going to have as severe of an impact, although the people around them will notice that they're acting differently. So another key difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder is that whereas in bipolar 1, you need to have the symptoms for at least a week, with bipolar 2, it's at least 4 days. So there's a little bit of a time difference. Generally in intensity, that's not quite as intense. And like I said, they're less likely to get themselves in trouble. My friends who have bipolar 2 disorder have said that, if they could bottle up their hypomania, it could be really helpful because they're really productive. They get a lot of cleaning done. But it can be very frustrating and exhausting for people who have all of this drive to do things and they feel like maybe they don't have anything particularly to do, but they're frustrated feeling like they have to do something. There's a third type of bipolar. It's sometimes called bipolar 3, but I don't come across it very often, so I haven't heard that. More often is referred to as cyclothymia. So cyclothymia doesn't really have the real high highs and low lows of traditional bipolar disorder, but it's over a period of about 2 years. The person is going to notice, and generally the people around them are going to notice periods of time where they're a little bit higher than normal and a little bit lower than normal, but not enough to meet the full criteria for a manic episode or hypomanic episode or a depressive episode. So we see those kind of coming in. Like I said, folks who have cyclothymia generally don't, for that reason, get themselves in trouble with the law. And so I'm less likely to come across them because my folks have all had um, have all had problems with the law. They've all been incarcerated or are serving time for their offenses. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of oh, I know what I forgot. Often with bipolar disorder, like I mentioned, they can go months and months being, and I hate to use the word normal, but like anybody else in the community with, without a mental health disorder. And during the periods of the episodes, like the mania, it does happen, and this is true for many of the guys that I work with that have bipolar disorder. They can also experience psychosis. So, and it's usually the psychosis is limited to those manic episodes. So 1 to maybe 3 weeks of psychotic symptoms. So often this comes across as, I can think of one patient off the top of my head who, every few months he starts saying that he's God, he's Jesus, he's, all these religious figures. And it's like, oh, where did this come from? That's unusual. And then the episode will pass and then he'll stop saying that and be able to say, yeah, that was my symptoms. I really don't think that I'm God. And then the next time he cycles, it'll come up again. So the psychosis is really where some of our guys can get themselves in trouble. And actually more as I say that, I think the impulsivity is what gets them the most in trouble, because they're more likely to be reckless and less likely to make good decisions like they might otherwise when they're not in an episode. So that's sort of a rundown of the 3 types of bipolar disorder and what the symptoms sort of look like. But I'm happy to pepper in some examples too, if that would be helpful.
Yeah. So just, you definitely gave a mouthful there. So thank you so much for that. So just so I clarify,
Yeah.
So the 3 types. So bipolar 1 is more of the manic symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
and bipolar 2 is more of the depressive symptoms.
Bipolar 2 can have both. I sort of think about it, if this is like a baseline, here's my little imaginary line. Bipolar 1 is going to spike a little bit higher. Bipolar 2 isn't going to spike as high, and then it's going to come back down around. So with bipolar 2, you're going to get the highs and the lows. They're just not going to be as high of highs, and they're not going to be as low of lows.
And then bipolar 3 is more like unpredictable.
Yeah, it's not going to be, there are periods of time when they're a little above their baseline and a little below their baseline, but there's no particular pattern, and they don't really meet criteria for the episodes as they're written in the DSM.
So bipolar 2 is more predictable in terms of episodes?
Generally, yeah. For the folks who experience bipolar 2, there's always a variety of experiences. Some people know every 6 months they're going to have an episode. For some people, it's a little bit quicker. And for some people, it's like once a year they have an episode. For some people, it's like a seasonal thing. They struggle during the holidays. And so the holidays are the time when they know they're going to cycle through their symptoms. So it really depends from person to person. But generally, if somebody is in tune with their symptoms and familiar with what their warning signs and their triggers for symptoms are, then they're going to be able to manage it a little bit better.
So what causes the change in episodes?
Brain stuff. That's my simple answer. There's a lot about the brain that we're still trying to figure out. And there's a lot, I think we know more about bipolar disorder than we do about schizophrenia. But it's still some stuff. I'm not a neuro expert, but there's plenty of stuff that happens in the brain that that causes these sort of polar differences. And I think it's fascinating the more that we learn about the brain, and it's such a complex system. We can't really point to one area of the brain and say this causes this. It's usually like a system and a network of connections that sort of make or break the issues.
Oh, all right. Interesting, interesting. So as you were talking, I was thinking of, I don't know if you heard of the movie Dear Evan Hansen.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I saw the movie like as you were describing it, the idea just the movie just popped into my head.
Uh-huh.
There's a girl who's the entire movie is a I mean it's I think the underlying theme of the movie is mental illness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um so there's a black girl in the movie. All the kids are in high school, and um she she has bipolar disorder, and how it's depicted in the movie is she's in like 10 different clubs, and she's
Mm-hmm.
the class president, and
Yeah.
she walks really fast, right? Because she's afraid if she slows down, people will, people will see that she thinks that people will see how like inadequate she is. um so the way they show it is like she's walking really fast, and she's in like 10, 15 different clubs, and she's always trying to do something, and
Mm-hmm.
she's always trying to stay busy. um so is it I mean movies take creative liberties, but is that a fair depiction of bipolar disorder?
You know, it's hard to say, because what we do know about bipolar disorder, there are many of the people who do have the disorder are very creative people, very driven people. I don't know that it would be necessarily to the extent that they'd be so overburdened with taking on various clubs. That seems more like a you've got something to prove sort of an issue, maybe attachment related. And but we do notice actually quite a few artists, musicians, actors tend to struggle with bipolar disorder. And there's a whole list of folks who have been very open and candid about their struggles with bipolar disorder, because just because of the wiring of their brain, they tend to be more on the creative side. Interestingly, and I think this is because bipolar folks tend to be more right brain, which is our creative side. They tend to be left-handed. And so you might notice a lot of the great musicians are left-handed. I'm thinking of like Jimi Hendrix and some others who were left-handed. I don't necessarily know why that is something with the way the wiring works in the brain, but we do have a lot of fantastic um, uh, creative people, I'll just say, who do have bipolar disorder and for whatever reason are left-handed. And it would be fun to do like a list of the people who meet all of those criteria. But I'm thinking particularly of there are a couple of musicians that I really enjoy. Halsey is one. She's spoken a lot about her struggles with bipolar disorder. BB Rexa is another one that I really like. She sings a lot about her struggles with bipolar disorder and talks about, he had to, one of her songs talks about, I had to get a medication change and my mom brought me flowers because I felt bad about it. And, I appreciate that celebrities are really stepping up and being real about the struggles they face, because it seemed like not too long ago they were coming across as these like perfect flawless people, and they're people just like the rest of us. Trying to think of some others. Mariah Carey has talked about her struggles with bipolar disorder. Russell Brand has been outspoken about his struggles with bipolar disorder and substance abuse. um, I know Selena Gomez has been in the news lately. I'm not following that drama, but she's been open about her struggles with bipolar disorder as well. And I think she also has struggled with eating disorders. So it's interesting how a lot of folks who struggle with bipolar disorder also struggle with comorbidity. So whether that's substance abuse or eating disorders, they all kind of clump together.
It's interesting. I didn't even know about Mariah Carey and bipolar, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. I have a sense that people with bipolar disorder, I mean, assuming if they're really lucky, they tend to be they tend to have certain positions, certain jobs that require a lot of energy,
Mm-hmm.
or requires a lot of time to put into it. So a lot of those artists that that you named.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so now I'm wondering if that's one of the things about bipolar disorder. Well, and one of the types is there's a lot of energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, you have to expel that energy somewhere.
Right.
So is it safe to say that they tend to be in certain positions that require a lot of energy? They tend to they tend to be musicians or actors. I think Jim Carrey is another one. Um, they tend to be. I don't want to say they tend to be celebrities, but I mean maybe though they tend to pursue. They tend to. I don't know if they tend to be celebrities, but they tend to be musicians or artists or
Mm-hmm.
movie stars, or they tend to be in professions that require a lot of energy, a lot of attention, a lot of focus. I wonder if that, do you think that's safe to say or fair to say?
Well, it's hard because if we think about their episodes when they're actually cycling is really a short period of time. It's one or 2 weeks generally when they have all of that energy to give. Um, and often a lot of people, especially folks with bipolar 2 disorder, and I'm not sure what the difference is here, will notice that they feel really exhausted afterward. And so they sort of withdraw. So often they'll say, this the their episodes are great because it helps them get work done around the house that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten done, but it does zap a lot of energy out of them, and so the fallout from after the episode can be really difficult. It can be hard to recover from that. And so while I think it might be more safe to say that many people, and again, I can't say all people with bipolar disorder, if they have a flexible work schedule that can work best with them, if they're able to take some time off, around the time of their episodes, that would be ideal. Not everybody can do that. But if they need to kind of flex their time a little bit, I think that would be the ideal scenario. And I think a lot of creators are able to have that flexible time. If they're having a day when they just cannot function, um, like they might do normally, then they can take a day off. And then if they have a really productive day, then they have a really productive day. But it's hard, like anything, it's hard to kind of pigeonhole them into one particular area. But I would say on the whole, any schedule where they can have a little more flexibility is probably an ideal scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought of another, sorry,
Oh, that's
TV
okay.
show example. So, in Law and Order, there's Elliot Stabler. Like there was an episode where we're introduced to Elliot Stabler's mom, and
Mm-hmm.
I think she's probably in her like 60s, 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and she has bipolar disorder, and the way that they show that is like the high energy, and she's talking really fast. And there was a story they told where she and Elliot were there. It's sort of like a retelling of the past. So like so the mom and Elliot as a child was in the car, and the mom was driving, and it was snowing, and the mom saw a snowflake, was like, I want to chase the snowflake, and she actually drove to chase the snowflake
Oh
to
dear.
and she, yeah, and she drove, and she crashed into a telephone pole,
Oh, that's
and
bad.
yeah, and the Elliot as a child broke his arm. And there's kind of the whole idea was that there's you gotta watch the whole episode, but the point
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like and that could be something to discuss in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
children of parents with bipolar disorder. They're really angry at them, right?
Oh,
Because
sure. It can be really confusing.
it's like it's the mood swings and
Mhm.
the grandiose thinking,
Mhm.
and things like chasing snowflakes, and it impacts their life.
Yeah.
So so there's a and there's a whole thing as well, like Elliot's daughter had bipolar, so there's a genetic connection.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
so I guess there's a few things I kind of put that in there. So is that another fair depiction of bipolar disorder? Things kind of the grandiose, not so sensical thinking of chasing
Mhm.
snowflakes, right? And
Right.
I'm gonna drive really, really fast because I want to catch a snowflake.
That
Um,
is very accurate of what can happen for a lot of folks with the impulsivity and the reckless driving
mm,
is for a lot of people the way that that symptom manifests. So there are quite a few people who struggle with um, the poor decision making skills and like I'm just going to go do this, boom, and then they do it, and sometimes it turns out to be a really really bad idea. I think one of the you had mentioned sort of some of the misconceptions about bipolar disorder. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I've noticed is that a lot of people believe or seem to believe that folks with bipolar disorder, like their mood can sort of shift on a dime, and that they can be up and then down in the same day, and that's not what bipolar disorder is. That's a really bad mood swing. And so most people have those, are capable of having those. And, we can have periods of time where we feel really down and then really energized in the same day. Folks with bipolar disorder, they're not going to make that switch that quickly. So um, they might have that week or two of the manic episode where they're really elevated, they're really up, and then months go by with nothing. They're just kind of bebopping around, and then all of a sudden they'll cycle into either another manic episode, or maybe some of them go down to a depressive episode. Um, what I notice there in it's always interesting when I get patients who are in an acute manic phase. We usually see them when they first get admitted because they're not well medicated and maybe they've been using substances beforehand, which can sort of tack on extra symptoms or exaggerate symptoms. So I've noticed there's generally the happy manic, there's an irritable manic, and then there's the really sexualized manic. And so the happy manic is the most fun to work with, but they're exhausting. So for the happy manic, like everything is great. They want to do this, they want to do that. I've got to get out of here because I need to start a taco stand, and then I have to write music for Selena Gomez, and I have to do this and I have to do that. And the world cannot go wrong for the person who's having that sort of manic episode, and they generally can be a lot of fun. And I actually last year I interviewed somebody who was the happiest manic I've seen in a long time, and he sang me a song that he wrote on the spot, and he did a whole exercise routine right in front of me that he wanted to show me, and there was just lots of fun stuff happening. And I thought, this is going to be really bad when this guy comes down out of this episode. And he had a little oopsie daisy afterward. But there's the happy manic, there's the overly sexualized manic. So these are the people where everything is sexual for them. They tend to act out sexually. They tend to expose themselves. They can, they're making inappropriate comments to peers, to staff, to whoever, and that can be very problematic for obvious reasons. And lastly, the irritable manic is probably the most difficult to deal with because anything will set them off. They're a little ball of energy that is just so frustrated by everything that's happening around them. And so if somebody looks at them the wrong way, talks to them the wrong way, they're gonna yell, they're gonna react aggressively. And those are the folks who, when they're in that acute stage, they can be really dangerous. And so those are the ones that we often have to watch out for. The nice thing about each of these types of manic episodes is that they are relatively easily treatable with medications. And so in a pretty quick period of time, that those manic episodes can come from here down to about here. It really is amazing. I had a patient not too long ago who for days on end just did not stop moving, didn't stop talking. He didn't stop to sleep. He didn't stop to eat. He just kept going. And my thought, I was recording for my podcast at the time, and I was talking about the origins of Oregon State Hospital. And I was reminded that a lot of patients who experienced mania back then would physically exhaust themselves to the point that they would die. And so a lot of them, because before we had mood stabilizing medications, they would get elevated blood pressure. They would, they have an increased heart rate. And so many of them just spontaneously died of heart failure because the mania was just too much and they could not get themselves to stop. And so I was thinking, as I was dealing with that patient who just for days and days and days kept going, I was thinking how back in the day, he probably would have died from that episode because there was no stopping him. And that it made me kind of sad to think about that because, I'm really thankful for many of the medications that we do have today. Even though some of them have problematic side effects, they really can be life-saving for a lot of people who would have otherwise not been able to handle the extent of their manic episodes. So that's sort of something that I think is really, I'm really thankful for in our modern age. I guess I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and it's speaking of medication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I have you talk about that? Because I know like a common one is lithium.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of I don't know, like my understanding of bipolar disorder is because I know, and we talked a lot about the mania part,
Mm-hmm.
not so much the depressive part, but it's sort of like a I don't want to say subjective, but it depends on like how much energy does the patient want. So
Yeah.
maybe they don't want to be on so much drugs, or
Mm-hmm.
they want that elevation, so to speak, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so can you get into the treatments more, like what's out there?
Sure. Yeah, and you bring up a good point that for a lot of people, and actually the happy manic person that I was working with last year, he specifically said, "I don't want to take medications. I need my mania." And I was thinking, well, if I were as happy as you, for this extended period of time, and as productive as he believed himself to be during that time, I probably wouldn't want medications either. And that is one of the risks that we have. Obviously I'm not a prescriber, but for psychiatry, it is a challenge sometimes when they don't want to take their medications. One of the things I often have to tell my patients is, my patients who have bipolar disorder, is that when they discharge, they are going to have to keep up with their medications. And it's very, very common for folks with any type of bipolar disorder to discontinue their medications because they feel good and they're in a good place. It's been 6, 7, 8 months. They haven't had any symptoms. Clearly, that means they don't have it anymore. And I've heard that more times than I can count. Oh, well, I just don't have bipolar anymore. And it's like, ooh. And then they go off their meds and all of a sudden, boom, they're right in the middle of a manic episode. And it's like, see, didn't go away. But it's tricky. It's hard to convince them, especially lithium is notorious for tasting really metallic and really bad. A lot of people don't like the taste and don't want to take it because of the taste. There's also the risk with lithium in particular of lithium toxicity. So they have to make sure that they're getting their blood drawn regularly to make sure that their lithium levels are where they're supposed to be, because that can be a potentially fatal risk. So for some folks, it's not worth it, and they'll say, well, I'd rather have the mania. There are a number of other medications. Latuda is a new one that a lot of prescribers use. Depakote is another one that a lot of prescribers use. There are fewer options. One of the things that we can't, or that prescribers can't offer, I shouldn't say can't, because they can, it just wouldn't be a good idea, is treating bipolar disorder with an SSRI or an antidepressant is or can be very dangerous, because it has the potential of undoing the balance and shifting the person into a manic episode. And so if you're only treating essentially the depression, that's going to boost the mood upward. And so I've seen plenty of times where somebody has come in just reporting symptoms of depression, and so they were prescribed an antidepressant only to find out, whoopsie daisies, there's a manic episode behind door number one. And that can be really dangerous. And so it's a delicate balance, and prescribers, have to take into account the fact that, somebody's entire history. If they're just reporting depressive symptoms, there is the risk with antidepressants that it could bump somebody over into a manic episode if they have bipolar disorder. I should also add, sort of similarly, this connects to the last episode about schizophrenia. There is a type of schizophrenia that is essentially schizophrenia plus bipolar disorder. It's called schizoaffective disorder. And so in this disorder, the symptoms of psychosis are continuous. So it's not just during the episodes, but they also have the manic episodes as well, and sometimes the depressive episodes. It's really a fascinating disorder because you kind of have the worst of all worlds, so to speak. I don't know what this thing in my hair is doing. Anyway, and so what differentiates schizoaffective disorder bipolar type from bipolar 1 with psychotic features is that in bipolar 1, the features of psychosis are only during that episode time, the 1 to, many as 3 weeks. And so the rest of the year, they're not experiencing symptoms of psychosis. Whereas in schizoaffective disorder, they're experiencing symptoms of psychosis the entire time with intermittent episodes of mania and or depression. So I would add that in as sort of a connection to what we talked about last time, because schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are very different, and sometimes they like to hang out together. And so for our patients, it's important to know when they're experiencing their mood episodes and when they're experiencing their symptoms of psychosis. It makes it a little more complex.
So touching on the depression part of bipolar disorder, so is there a difference between a depressive episode and major depression, or is it just depression, or how do you know it's not depression but a depressive episode of bipolar disorder?
Sometimes it's really hard to tell. I don't know that I could tell the difference. Like if I just met somebody for the first time and they're talking about depressive symptoms, because the symptoms are on paper they're similar, but I've heard people who have bipolar disorder describe them more intensely than folks with unipolar depression, just depression. And I think there are scientific studies about that as well, that the depths of the bipolar depression are deeper and greater than unipolar depression. It's also more difficult to treat. I was I remember learning that bipolar depression is more dangerous in regard to suicide. And then when I went to take my licensing exam last year, well, I guess it's been a year and a half already. One of the questions actually was related to which disorder is most likely going to result in suicide. And the answer was major depressive disorder, which on the whole makes sense. And I had actually thought that it was bipolar depression. So I remember that confusing me. So if anybody's studying for the EPPP, there's your freebie. They recycled that out.
Thank you for thank you for that freebie.
I'm not helping anybody cheat here.
Well, it's probably in terms of cycles, right? So in terms of the depression part of bipolar disorder is probably part of a cycle. So I think I remember in the DSM, like depression has to be at least like 2 consistent weeks. So I mean, you can have a depressive episode for like 3 months and then flip to a manic episode, right? So I think I'm assuming it's the same symptoms, but just in cycles.
Right. And so let's see. Yeah, I'm just double checking. Yeah, it's 2-week period for bipolar 1 disorder as well, or for bipolar disorder, generally speaking.
Yeah. All right. So did we get into the misconceptions? Oh, I think I remember when people say like, oh, I feel I'm so bipolar today. Like it's so
huge
blah
pet peeve
blah.
of mine.
Okay. So let's talk about that.
If I could strike like I'm so bipolar and I'm so OCD from like everybody's vocabulary, I would be so happy.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with people are so like nonchalant about it?
Because what they're more likely describing is a mood swing. It's you're up and then somebody says something and you're down. It's a normal reaction to have something like that. If I'm having a pretty good day, I'm bebopping along, then somebody like says something that really unsettles me, then my mood plummets. It's not me being bipolar, it's me having a normal reaction to somebody being a jerk. Or I'm trying to think of another example. Even if you just kind of are having a good day and then all of a sudden for no seeming reason at all, your mood turns and all of a sudden you're cranky. There's probably some reason that you aren't even consciously aware of that led to that. But again, that's not bipolar disorder. It's a much slower process, and it's not going to be over in an hour or two. It's going to be over in a week or two, and it's far more problematic, especially if we're talking about bipolar 1 disorder. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key factors is that it's going to have significant impairment in that person's life. So there's going to be repercussions from their symptoms and their behavior as a result of their symptoms. So it just feels very flippant to say, "Oh, I'm bipolar," and it's like, no, you're having a bad day or you're cranky. So be real. And don't get me started on OCD.
All right, that's another episode. Oh man, right. So like it has to be for any kind of episode, right? Whether it's a manic episode or a depressive episode, it's at least 2 weeks to continue.
For manic, it's at least 1 week.
Oh, 1 week. Okay.
Yeah.
And depressive is 2 weeks?
About 2 weeks.
About 2 continuous weeks. Okay. So there's I love how there's a chart or like that's what the DSM is like a Bible, right? Like, how long has it been? 2 weeks? Okay, wait. What is it?
And that's only for bipolar 1. For bipolar 2, the mania is 4 days. So it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Yeah. All right. So time is going. So misconceptions. Did we talk about that?
Yeah,
okay.
I think
we did.
Yeah, I think the big one for me, like we said, the people saying I'm so bipolar. one of the big things for me that I try to teach my patients in order to give them a sense of empowerment is we have in our language saying I am bipolar, and I've encouraged them not to use that because they are more than their diagnosis. And so I encourage them to revise that and say I have bipolar disorder. And so that would probably be something that I would encourage your listeners, your viewers, to make sure that you're really cognizant of, and just striking that from your own language. We are people first. Our mental illnesses, be that as they may, are secondary to the rest of us. And so, I try to avoid using language like, oh, she's bipolar. Oh, he's bipolar. And in favor of she has bipolar disorder or he has bipolar disorder, so that it's not their entire identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify,
Yeah.
and I know time is going.
Okay.
So with bipolar, is there like there's a manic episode, there's like a period of where you're at your baseline and then there's a depressive episode, or is it just from depressive to mania?
It depends. It really depends. So some people I've seen it happen where somebody is manic and then they flip immediately into a depressive episode because they're just so exhausted from the mania. And then I've seen it happen where somebody is manic, they return to baseline, and then months later they might go into a depressive episode. It's really different from person to person. There's not really a universal experience that everyone's going to have, X, Y, or Z. It's really unfortunate when they flip immediately from mania into depression because that just is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's hard to watch.
All right. I know, we could keep going, but, we're going to start to wind things down. So is there any final thoughts or any, words of wisdom that you want our audience to know about bipolar disorder, about mental illness in general? What are your final thoughts?
I actually wrote down one idea, but I think I'm actually going to piggyback on what I just mentioned about being person centered in speech and making sure that we are using language that is appropriate and that somebody else is using to identify themselves. So, there are all sorts of mental disorders and physical disorders where the language is starting to shift. And I would just be cognizant and feel free to ask people, how would you like me to address this, or how would you like me to talk about this with you? And usually they're more than happy to say, oh, I prefer that you say XYZ, because rather than assuming, that they want to use this term or that term. So being person first, I'm a person with bipolar disorder. I'm a person with a physical disability, and just to be mindful of that as we move forward.
Awesome. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for this amazing episode, and thank you for coming back on Hot Topics. We definitely dived a lot into this, and all of this is adults, right? We didn't even get into, in kids, but that, that's a whole other thing there. Yeah. All right. So let's jump right into the promo. All right. So you guys, Sarah is all over that social media. She has a Facebook group that's super secret Facebook group. It is called Behind the Walls Podcast. You have to track her down.
There.
You got to track her down in order to get in the group, right? So, you could find her on her personal page. I don't know if you want people going to your personal page, but you can contact, there's an email address. So
email
tell people to email you, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to get in the Facebook group about her podcast, send her an email. The email is behindthewallspodcast@gmail.com. So send her an email and try to get into the Facebook group. She also has 2 Instagram accounts, Leanie Lou Who and Behind the Walls
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Oh, wait.
Oh, now you're back.
Now I'm back. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I might just cut out. Okay. Did you hear? You heard the Instagram part?
Yes.
Okay. You heard the TikTok? Okay. Sorry. I'm going to repeat it again. All right. Sarah has 2 Instagram accounts. Follow both of them. One of them is Limi Luhu, and the other one is Behind the Walls Pod. So follow
Mm-hmm.
both of them on Instagram. And she has a TikTok account. It is Dr. Sarah Hyleen. So follow her on TikTok as well. Um, it and we'll oh yes, and the podcast. Of course, we gotta talk about the podcast. So Sarah has a podcast, which we talked about in the intro. It is called Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. Check out her podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. So, if it's Spotify or Apple or Podchaser or
Mm-hmm.
Good Pods, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find behind the walls of the world's psychiatric hospitals and
Oh.
subscribe to our podcast, you guys. Sarah, is there anything else you want to promote or share or anything you want our audience to know?
Nothing that's coming up right now. Just feel free to check out the podcast. Episodes come out on Mondays, so hope to see you there.
Fabulous, fabulous. So there you go. Check it out, you guys. Check out her podcast and subscribe. All right. So, Sarah, thank you again for this amazing episode. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. All right, you guys. All right, you guys. We are at the conclusion of yet another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, of course, as a reminder, Hot Topics is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, if you are looking for a tutor, whether it is for your child or for yourself, because we also work with adults, reach out to us. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. My team and I, we offer one-on-one tutoring, college counseling, test prep, editing and proofreading, papers, PowerPoint presentations, and we also offer a variety of virtual workshops. Our one-on-one tutoring, we do in person for our local area of New York City, and we also do virtual as well to those in the United States. So reach out to us if you are looking for any kind of academic assistance, whether it's homework help or time management or anything under that umbrella. Reach out to us. Seek our tutoring services. The website again is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. I am also going to tell you about our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Eventbrite, and WhatsApp. So follow us on all of our social media accounts. Just type in A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. Just do a regular search and boom, we will just pop up. So you'll see our name. Just follow us. Our logo is the pencil with the grand white tip. So follow us on social media and stay in touch with us as well. You can also email us at success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You could also call or text us. Text is preferred. The number is 347-762-2838. So there are so many ways that you can get in touch with us. So I encourage you to get in touch with us in any of those ways. If you are seeking for a tutor or you just want to know what we're all about, check us out. The website again, www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. I also want to encourage you to leave your feedback about this episode. I want to know what you thought about this episode. So if you're watching this on video, drop a comment in the comment section or in the comment thread. Let me know your thoughts about this episode. Give me your feedback. If you're listening to this on a podcast, drop a rating, drop a star. Well, not a star. Is it fair to tell you how many stars I want? Well, I would like 5 stars, but either way, let me know your feedback about this episode. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, please drop a rating. Depending on which one you're listening to, you can also drop a comment in the comment section as well. So, however you are taking in this episode, whether it is on video or on a podcast, leave a comment, leave a rating. Let us know what you thought about this episode today. All right, you guys, and that is it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me on the next episode. And now I am signing off. Bye, you guys.